Hello and welcome back to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge. Today we're diving deep into the intersection of data, privacy, and performance in the ads world. My guest is Ollie James, CEO of Adttribution, a next-gen ad tech company supplying high-quality audience data for connected TV, mobile, and desktop campaigns. On a mission to help brands prove ROI without breaking consumer trust. And in an era where cookies are crumbling and privacy laws are tightening, that mission couldn't be more relevant. Before leading Adttribution, cut his teeth at RockAd, the identity resolution pioneer, and managed strategic clients like Apple, iTunes, and American Express. What sets him apart is his ability to turn complex ad tech into commercial clarity, helping brands not just collect data, but actually use it responsibly and profitably. So grab your notebook because this one's packed with actionable insights for marketers, founders, and growth leaders alike. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. You have a very impressive resume, and excited to hear your insights. Now, one thing that I know you emphasize is helping clients, maybe non-technical marketers, understand complex technology. What would you say is the secret to turning complex technical topics into clear understandings with these kinds of clients? I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with.
It's really tricky, and I struggle with it myself because we live in this world of acronyms. And the trouble is with the acronyms is that the acronyms means different things to different people. And I really struggle. And I think one of the key things is to try and simplify things as much as possible and try to at least clarify what the acronym means in the conversation when you bring one up. So when we're talking about ROAS, then it's the return on advertising spend versus, some other person's understanding of what it is. And all of these, I mean, in my world, I work sort of primarily in the programmatic world. And we've got, SSPs and DSPs and all sorts of wonderful different entities that interact with each other during this play. So I think that's the first key point is to, when you're discussing something, is to try and dial down on the acronyms and assume that there's a really smart guy called Keith Fagan, who is the chief product officer at Sovereign, who are a partner of ours over in the States. And I had dinner with him once and he said, Ollie, explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And it stopped me in my tracks because I then really realized, actually, I'm not sure I can. And if I can't, that means I don't really deeply understand the topic that we're talking about. So I always hark back to what Keith was saying about this oversimplification, because you get a lot of people in a room that just kind of nod and pretend they understand or won't stop or don't feel they have the confidence to kind of interject and say, I'm really sorry, can you just kind of unpack that and dive a bit deeper into it? So yeah, I hark back to Keith's words on that one. Try to explain everything like I'm a 5-year-old. Then you really get to the nib of the subject.
Yeah, no, that's a great rule of thumb. And I think earlier in my career, I was the one nodding along frequently. And I think that over time, that it is definitely more valuable to, if you feel like the 5-year-old in the room on the technical topics, I think it's fair to, it's a good exercise in humility, but it's a good almost pushback to see how well they understand it. Can you clarify that for me? And I think it makes for a fruitful discussion too. I think that's worthwhile.
I think the other one is to try and use analogies as well if you can. There's a great marketer, a friend of mine called Bryony Thomas, who would describe. She would say use an analogy like, how would you steal your neighbor's cat in terms of marketing, and relate that to how you draw an audience in. And it's like, you don't go and try and chase the cat around the garden. You don't go with a box and try and stuff it in. You leave a little breadcrumb trail of little food and you carefully entice. And she put marketing into this great analogy of stealing your neighbor's cat. And this cat open the cage and it runs back across the garden to your neighbor, but you got to keep that cat, aka that customer, very happily curled up on your sofa to say, it's now your cat, aka your customer. So that was a wonderful way she used this analogy to describe sort of marketing in general. So I would think that another one, and it stuck with me. I thought that's always, because that's an approach to marketing, and it encompasses so much of what we do and how to do it and the nuances of actually winning a new customer and keeping hold of them. So I thought that was a great one.
I like that a lot. I might be borrowing that in the future. I think, I can totally envision, how cats are so skittish and they are of course afraid but also motivated by food, and so
Yeah.
you have to figure out the balance between trust and motivation. And
Yeah, bring new customers, and we want to keep hold of them. And that's the key, isn't it? And that sort of customer loyalty play. People think of marketing as just that top of funnel. I mean, if you must use funnel as an analogy, then, but actually people come out of the bottom and we lose customers right the way down at every single stage. So yeah, the cat one's fun. Keep it on the sofa, warm, happy, and not wanting to get back out there to see what's in your other neighbor or down the road.
Right. Well, good lessons about retention.
Yeah,
in that.
exactly that. You can pack into a simple analogy of stealing a cat. And I think that really helps break that down. You can apply that to technical terms, whiteboard out, and maybe try and sort of things into objects and connect those objects together. That's often quite a good way in terms of when you're explaining technical subjects, is to get we used to call it object orientated engineering back in the day, where you would have object one, how does that interact with object two? And then draw the diagram, and then people can see the infrastructure that's behind it and the flow of a journey. And always have the user and always have the advertiser. And then if you can show how those connections between those two, like physically and as simply as you can, as if you're explaining it to a 5-year-old, because if a 5-year-old's in your class at school, the first thing that the teacher does is pick up a whiteboard marker. I mean, these days, I guess they use a computer and a screen, but essentially that visualization of processes and interconnectivity of the different elements of technology is often a really good way to help people understand what it is that you're talking about.
Yeah, and well, I like what you say too about using, with the same client or same group at a client, you use different teaching methods. So maybe you've got the allegory, and then you've got the object visualization on the whiteboard, or the hands-on, like let's diagram this together. There's definitely a lot of different value. I actually find this topic really interesting, and I can tell you've thought about this a lot. But maybe let's apply this to another concept that I know you're an expert in, is attribution. Now, a big question every marketer has, or every business executive has, is how do you attribute, what marketing spend, ad spend results in the greatest return? Now, one thing that we always consider is that the ad isn't always the only touch point that an individual has with, in a purchase journey. And so, but sometimes it's hard to figure out what are the other touch points and how influential other touch points were. Tell us a little bit about how you think through attribution and maybe how you describe it to customers that have that same question.
Sure. I mean, I started my journey back in 2002, my career journey at Trade Doubler, which was the European biggest affiliate network. So in an affiliate business, an advertiser pays a publisher a commission from the action that's driven through that publisher carrying the ad. So, in the UK, we have the Telegraph or the Times, or we click on an ad, we go through to an e-commerce store, we buy something, and then the publisher gets a commission from the advertiser via the affiliate network for that sale. I spent 6 years there using cookies, which is a kind of a packet of information. It's like a barcode that is downloaded to the user's machine, and we're able to read that barcode at the end of the transaction to see whether or not it was driven by a publisher. And those cookies were going away, and now it doesn't look like they are going away. I'm talking about Google Chrome, which is one of the biggest web browsers, that will deprecate the third-party cookie and say, hey, you're not allowed to drop this barcode, this sort of scanning reflector onto people's computers anymore because there are privacy issues. And they decided actually in the end that they were going to continue e-commerce. We either tracked the sale or the transaction in session. So we would pass a bunch of code from the publisher to the advertiser website and read that. But that doesn't work when the user is crossing over from their mobile device. As you said, we've got this multi-touch point of attribution, right? So someone can see an ad on their phone and then move across to their iPad. They then walk past a billboard and they see that again. They get a friend of theirs sees the ad and talks to them about it on the bus. So you get that kind of referral, or you get email marketing. I was chatting to Suze Chaplin from ESB Connect the other day about her email marketing company and how that is a part of driving a sale. And we say, 7 to 10 to 12 touch points before a user is actually converted into a customer. They have to see things more than once on multiple devices in order to actually transact. And of course, on the flip side of that, you get people that just see an ad and buy it straight away. So it doesn't apply to it. But the more considered the purchase is, And what I mean by that is the more kind of expensive it is, in its more basic term, if you're buying a car or you're buying a family holiday, the more considered that purchase is, the more touch points you will find people interact with, and the more value that needs to be added along that chain. So it's the holiday review website with a deep article on the destination that you want to visit probably has a lot more impact than the coupon site does. Use some money off the taxi when you get your airport taxi or transfer when you get there. So it depends on the kind of transaction, the kind of things that are people buying as to what helps and where the value lies. But we've not solved it. And of course, I was talking to Anders Littner yesterday about, he works for a company called Brand Metrics, and we were talking about brand lift and how you can measure that and the impact of a brand can affect somebody's decision to purchase, which we can't track online. I can't say that if somebody is a brand loyal person, they see an ad once, they go through and click. Is it the publisher that was holding the ad? Was it a Google search result that sent it? Was it ChatGPT? Was it one of these LLMs, these AI agents that have suggested that you visit this website? Or was it because that brand has just, if you're a snowboarder and you like your Burton snowboard, massive brand within snowboarding, and I'm a bit of a fanboy of Burton, and yeah, I might see an ad, but I knew I was going to buy that Burton jacket, albeit that the last one I bought was a retro jacket that's like 20 years old on eBay because I really like the brass buttons down the front of it. So it wasn't that Burton have particularly sold me on this massive technical jacket. It was just because I love that old school brand. Impossible to say that eBay ad converted me. So brand has a big impact on it. And you can use, like you asked me about the tools you have, the Google Analytics will always claim that its search activity was responsible for driving 100% in it, and that they want all of the value, and everybody is trying to get a piece of that pie. And certainly with my company, we're trying to provide the data layer that is able to say, yeah, this person saw the ad across their different devices and in this place, and try and help inform that decision. Although I don't think whether we will ever be able to truly look behind that attribution story and say where in this, which elements created the value that led to the conversion, and then which elements were most valuable and most important in driving that sale, I think is whether or not I've just set myself up for this impossible hiding every year because it's an impossible thing. But we can try, and we can take inferences from the data that we have and use just a bit of our common sense. And I think if it comes down to a certain extent to quality, and if we can make sure that we're improving quality within that chain, and we have a really well written email, for example, if you're using email marketing, or we have a really great piece of creative, we don't outsource our copywriting to an AI agent, we don't outsource creative to an AI agent, and we keep that human in the loop, and we use the agencies and the really smart people, that the strategists within our agencies and the senior, the CMOs at brands. And I think that's the way we can ensure that what we're doing is worthwhile, rather than kind of worrying too much about this whole big chain and which piece of it was most influential.
Yeah. Well, that's a great overview. The big question, there's a lot of big questions, but AI obviously has introduced some additional complexity here. We're probably not too far away from AI allowing us to advertise directly on the platform, but for now, like ChatGPT, for instance, already I know a lot of marketers are trying to improve their placement in AI answers with certain techniques. What kinds of data and how has the impact of AI, how has that changed your role in helping define the attribution? People are using it more and more. They're doing different kinds of searching. There's a huge adoption cycle. We were just talking about before the call started that there's a potential bubble where things might be turned on their head. Tell us a little bit about how AI plays in the work you do.
There's a number of different elements with it. So we have identity data. So we have lots of identifiers, IDs that we take from sort of mobile devices and all your different devices. And then we look at online activities such as the time with which an ad was clicked on. It's called a timestamp. And we grab that because that timestamp is really, really long and therefore it's unique essentially. And we tie that to an ad ID or a mobile ID. And we build an idea of a user, a digital representation of a user. And we say, hey, this person person is likely to be of a certain demographic or interested in has visited a website that is about, I don't know, Florida vacations or whatever, and therefore he's probably an intent, he or she, or they are probably an intender to buy a Florida holiday or something like that. So we are seeing now that the on the buy side, so the advertisers are using AI in order to come and find those audience. So they're using an AI agent to come and they'll just tell it with a prompt, go and find me everybody that's interested in Florida that's aged between this and that earns a certain amount of money, that has visited a related website within the last couple of months. So rather than that being a media buyer, an actual person that's going and selecting and researching us as a data company and finding out whether our data is ethical, it's all moving towards, we're in the trial stages of these AI agents buying media, taking up some of my headspace. And because we have to develop the protocols and the compliance mechanisms to make that safe and to ensure that, you know, the user's privacy is maintained and that the whole ad tech ecosystem is communicating properly. So there's ADCP is a protocol that's just come out that we're working on in order to try and standardize the way that this is all going to talk to each other. So that's taking up a lot of time and effort. And the other thing is obviously I'm thinking a lot about how this affects publishers, because publishers are cash strapped. They're under fire. They are having their, you know, I don't know, but if you spend £1 on an ad, what does it get? A couple of cents gets to the publisher because we've built this big fat layer in between the advertiser and the publisher. And now the AI comes along and says, hey, you don't need to go visit the publisher anymore. We'll show you these results and we'll push you to where you need to go. And so we're thinking about how we make sure that publishers are still remunerated well and that they don't lose the small piece of the pie that they have left to these agents, and how that distribution of equity when it comes to ad spend is fair, and that we don't, because otherwise we just lose the publishers, and then you lose, because publishing an ad on a publisher website is there to pay for the journalism, and we have to have the journalists. We have to fund that news cycle and publishing and blog writers and content writers, that otherwise we lose that, and then it's all AI, and that's a very bleak world.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And no, that's it. That's an excellent point. You know, obviously there's going to have to be some sort of rejustification or rebalancing of this environment to keep incentivizing people to generate original content, you know, and, you know, do that as a profession. So, you know, I guess that brings me to another point. You know, there's a lot of ethical questions in the data gathering, the attribution, the use of AI. What are some of the ethical questions that you wrestle with, and you know, maybe some ideas that you are a proponent of that maybe our audience hadn't considered?
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we have is that the end user, the average Joe, so to speak, doesn't understand consent, doesn't understand how their data is being used, doesn't in some necessarily care, or isn't educated and savvy enough to understand what the implications of their data usage is, and they're certainly not being remunerated for having their data being widely used and monetized without their sort of knowledge. And we've all seen that, you know, when you visit a website, you click a button, do you accept cookies? I mean, we've hit the actual point of people just, I mean, yes or no. Yeah, they can have my cookie. Yes, I'll say good to those guys. Someone else, I don't know, a law firm or something. No, I don't want that. But actually, the privacy policies are the same. I click yes on the Burton website, but on the Burton website, subtext will give them the ability to sell. And this is not against me, I haven't checked, but I use it as a method. It doesn't matter which I click. If I've said yes on one, then that opens the gate for everyone else to use it. And I don't think people understand that enough. So we need to educate users, or we need to take it out of their hands and say that we are going to take that consent and make sure that no one's data is being used without them truly understanding it. And we will use it in a way that is not personally identifiable. And in the US and Europe, it's a very different thing. In Europe, we have the GDPR, where you can't use sort of people's email addresses, or you can't use them without there being some encryption in place. And in the US, it's slightly different. It's still, although we have state laws now, so state by state in the US, they're kind of waking up to it, and they look at what the Europeans doing in terms of regulation and privacy, and they're implementing it. But we've got to be careful that we don't sort of choke the system too much, and that we don't over-regulate. And I think that education piece for users in terms of But how do you do that? I don't know. Because I don't think that most people are interested particularly. I wish these cookie banners would just go away and just let me go on the internet. And I realize that you're going to show me an ad for something that I might like to buy. That would be fantastic. Yeah. And once I've bought the bloody thing, stop showing me the ad.
Stop showing.
If we could crack that bit, I think it would be good. But I think there's great work that the IAB, the International Advertising Bureau, global organization, great work that they're doing. The IAB Tech Lab in particular are always coming up with great solutions and suggestions. And we're working together as an industry via these different groups to address these issues and to put technology in place. It all comes back to quality as well. And these websites that are sort of made for advertising, built by AI, there's a war against those. We're identifying them, we're blacklisting them, and we're trying to make sure that users don't end up on them and that we're not putting cash into these entities. There's lots of work going on behind the scenes. I think we need to be a bit more vocal about it, shine a light on it a bit more. And I think the likes of Googles of the world could be doing more to help with that. The walled gardens, as we call them, ought to be kind of leading the way and doing more in terms of ethics and privacy. But ultimately what we want to do is to get the cash to the publishers, to the content creators that are fueling this whole ecosystem. And anything that's kind of preventing that is a challenge.
Well, Ollie, that is a lot of information to digest.
It's quite
No, it's great. You make my job easy, I would say, as the host. You have a great way of explaining things, and this is valuable information. So, Ollie, if people are interested in you, obviously they could reach you at your website, adttribution.com.
Adttribution. Yeah, that's us.
But where else could they find you? What are any other links that you'd like to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't do a great deal of socials because of my age, I guess. But LinkedIn, I think I actually got LinkedIn/Ollie James because I've been on there for so long. That's me. LinkedIn/Ollie James. Reach out, say hello, send me a message.
Well, whether you want to work with Ollie as to help you with your attribution or need a great podcast guest, I would definitely recommend Ollie for both. So thanks so much for joining us today, Ollie.
I appreciate you, Reed. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Want to stay ahead of what's actually working in marketing right now? Head over to MarketSurge.io and see how we're helping businesses grow smarter, faster, and louder. That's MarketSurge.io, because your next breakthrough shouldn't be a guess.